So you've perfected your recipe, created your product, and made it shelf stable. So now, how do you test your product so that you can guarantee to your customers that it is going to be safe for consumption? That's what we're going to talk about in this video today. The intensity and type of testing will largely depend on the type of product that you have. This is going to be a mix of common sense, professionalism, and having real world data. So there are testing facilities and laboratories that you can go to get your shelf life tested and your product certified so that it can be deemed safe for human consumption on a long enough time frame, or at least the time frame that you've deemed that this product should be shelf stable for. So every food product has its own set of risks, especially when it comes to spoilage and food safety. I'll give you an example. So let's just say that your product is a type of specialty salt. Let's just say you're repackaging Himalayan sea salts. Now, Himalayan sea salts, or any type of salt, for example, or dried goods, for example, are a very, very low risk product. Why is this? Because have you ever heard of salt spoiling? No, right? It's salt. Salt never spoils. You can leave it in your cupboard for 50 years and it's not going to spoil. So the nature of this food product is that it's going to be very low risk and basically next to impossible to have spoilage. Now, if you're creating something like a canned meat, that's going to pose a very high risk because canned meats, if they're not sterilized properly or they're not cooked properly or sealed properly or prepared properly, you can run the risk of botulism, which is a bacteria that can actually end up being lethal and kill the people who consume it. So the type of product is going to be what dictates the type of testing that's going to be done and also the length of testing that's going to be done. Now, there's various methods to go about testing your product, which we'll talk about. One of the main ways is you have to take it to a food laboratory. And what the food laboratory will do is they will ask you how long you want your shelf life to be tested for. It's not up to the food laboratory themselves to tell you how long your food should last. You have to have this already predetermined in your head or planned out for your product ahead of time. So, for example, my hot sauce. My hot sauce needed to be shelf stable for 2 years. So how do we go about testing the shelf stability of a hot sauce that needs to be shelf stable for 2 years? Well, when you go into the laboratory, what they do is they conduct tests, and they conduct tests in time intervals that you tell them or instruct them to do. So I needed a food product that was going to be shelf stable for 2 years. However, I didn't know exactly, say, if it was shelf stable for only 6 months, we couldn't test at the 2 year mark exactly because if it was only shelf stable for 6 months and we tested it at 2 years, it would have shown spoiled. So I also wanted to determine how long it's going to be shelf stable for, even though my target was 2 years. So when you go to the food laboratory, when I went to the food laboratory for my hot sauce, what I did was I asked them to test it in the first 7 days, so 1 week. Then after that, I said test it again in 2 weeks. Then after that, I said test it again in a month, then 3 months, then 6 months, then a year, then a year and a half, and then finally 2 years. So what the food laboratory will do is they will store your products on a shelf, and once the 7 day mark hits, they will go in and test your product for any sort of bacteria or spores or spoilage or anything like that, and they'll print you out a report. So ideally, if you want your product to last 6 months, you want to have your product tested multiple times before this 6 month period and make sure that there's no spoilage going on throughout that time frame. So if you want your product to last for 6 months and you test at the 7 day mark, it's good, and you test at the 15 day mark, it's good, and you test at the 1 month, it's good, 3 months, it's good, but at the 6 month mark, now you have some spoilage and bacteria. Well, what you need to do is go back to the drawing board and figure out what happened. Why did your product not last as long as you intended? Maybe it was an acidified product, which wasn't acidified properly, or the pH wasn't low enough. Maybe it was a dried good, which had still too much humidity inside. Maybe you had a salted item or a product that was, as we previously talked about, preserved by sugars. Any number of these things, or even you had a sterilized product, like, for example, which is important when it comes to canned meats, a sterilized product, which maybe your sterilization temperature wasn't correct, or the equipment you used wasn't correct. So you intended it to last 6 months, but it only lasted 3 months. Now, if you want it to last 6 months and you test it in the first 7 days, there was already spoilage, you're way off the mark. You've done something terribly wrong in this process, and you need to go back to the drawing board and actually figure out the different shelf preservation techniques for your product. Now, generally speaking, when you're trying to get your products into the larger retail chains, depending on the risk factors of your product, will determine how in depth they want you to test the product and how much certifications they would require or proof that the lab has done these shelf testing um, intervals at the times that are required. So, again, if you're selling a product like canned tuna or canned beef or something like this, which is a very high risk product if not done properly, then more than likely the grocery store or the supermarket chain is going to ask you for proof of documents from the laboratory. But if you're gonna be selling again Himalayan sea salt, most retailers won't even ask for a shelf stability or a shelf life because they know it's a very low risk product and nothing's gonna happen. Or if you're selling dried spices, when have you ever seen pepper go bad and spoil? But things like meats, sausages, eggs, milk, things that can spoil and harm somebody and create some toxic bacteria or lethal bacteria even, they're going to be much more stringent in what they require for you to submit in terms of testing. Because they also want to keep their customers safe for one, but they also want to avoid lawsuits. Could you imagine if you had a supermarket that sold your product in 500 of their stores and all of a sudden now 1,000 people ended up in the hospital for botulism? That would be a PR nightmare and a legal nightmare and also a moral nightmare, right? So, depending on the risk factors of your product, the supermarkets will require different levels of shelf life testing and proof. In summary, the rigorous testing of your food product is a very important piece of the food business because you need to make sure that your products aren't harming people, right? So you have to take the steps necessary in order to get this done. Don't jump and skip this step because it may be a little expensive or you may have to do multiple testings. Because in the end, if your food product is not tested properly, this is something that can actually destroy your business. If you grow your business to a $1 million, $2 million business, $10 million business, and all of a sudden you have 500 stores that sold a product that was dangerous or harmful to people, you can almost kiss your business goodbye because the lawsuits that are going to be coming from there you're not going to be able to get out from under them. So you need to protect yourself and also protect the customers, obviously, first and foremost. Now, these food laboratories, generally speaking, can be found in any major city. You just can do a quick Google search, shelf life testing food laboratory. And if you're around a major city, somebody will have it. Or there's going to be many labs that you find, and a few labs will do food product testing or shelf life testing, things like this. Every major city that I've seen usually has a lab or two that can get this done for you. Again, don't skip this step. Make sure you get it done. I'd like to take a minute and ask you if you've enjoyed the content thus far in this video and you like the information that you're seeing, please like and subscribe for the algorithm as it really does help our page grow and get our content out to more eyes.